January 30th, 1945, 7:40 p.m., Cabanatuan POW Camp, Philippines. Captain Robert Prince lies flat in tall grass, 50 yards from the Japanese guard towers. Behind him, 120 Army Rangers are pressed into the dirt, waiting for a signal. They've crawled through this grass for an hour, moving inches at a time, praying the guards don't spot them. Inside the camp, 511 American prisoners have no idea rescue is coming. They've been captive for nearly 3 years. Most survived the Bataan Death March. All of them have endured starvation, disease, and torture. Many are too weak to walk. Some are dying. And just 2 weeks ago, these prisoners heard a rumor that chilled them to the bone. On Palawan Island, 250 miles south, the Japanese burned 150 American POWs alive in their trenches. Only 11 escaped. The prisoners at Cabanatuan know they're next. Any day now, the guards will receive the order, execute them all. But tonight, something impossible is about to happen. Prince looks at his watch. Any second now, a P-61 Black Widow night fighter will buzz the camp, drawing the guards' attention to the sky. When that happens, Prince's men will have exactly 30 seconds to cover 50 yards of open ground, cut through barbed wire, and storm the guard towers before the Japanese realize what's happening. If this goes wrong, everyone dies. The Rangers. The prisoners, all of them. But if it goes right, this will be the most successful rescue mission in American military history. Prince checks his watch one more time. He hears the distant rumble of an aircraft engine, and then he gives the signal, go. This is the story of the Cabanatuan raid, the mission that saved 511 lives, the perfect execution of an impossible plan, and the revenge for Palawan that the Japanese never saw coming. Section 1. The Ghosts of Bataan, to understand why 511 Americans were imprisoned at Cabanatuan, and why rescuing them became one of the most important missions of 1945, you need to understand what happened 3 years earlier. The worst military disaster in American history. April 9, 1942, the surrender. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they simultaneously invaded the Philippines. 76,000 American and Filipino troops retreated to the Bataan Peninsula and held out for 4 brutal months. They were starving, cut off from supplies, suffering from malaria and dysentery. On April 9, 1942, they surrendered, the largest surrender of American forces in history. The Japanese immediately forced them on a 65-mile march to prison camps. The Bataan Death March. 10,000 men died on that march shot, bayoneted, or beaten to death for falling behind. The survivors were split between several camps. The largest was Cabanatuan, about 60 miles north of Manila. At its peak, Cabanatuan held over 8,000 prisoners. But by January 1945, only about 500 remained. 3 years of hell between 1942 and 1945. Thousands of prisoners died at Cabanatuan from disease, starvation, and execution. Others were shipped to Japan as slave labor, many dying when American submarines unknowingly torpedoed the unmarked transport ships carrying them. The prisoners who remained were the sickest, weakest, and most broken. Men too ill to work, men missing limbs, men suffering from malaria, dysentery, beriberi, and pellagra. Many weighed under 100 pounds. Army Captain Ed Dias, who later escaped and told the world about Bataan, described Cabanatuan this way: "We died at a rate of 40 per day. Men simply laid down and stopped fighting. Their bodies gave out, their spirits gave out. And they died, but by late 1944, something changed. Hope returned." MacArthur returns. On October 20th, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur fulfilled his famous promise. He returned to the Philippines, landing at Leyte with massive American forces. The prisoners at Cabanatuan could hear the distant thunder of naval gunfire. They could see B-24 Liberators flying overhead. Liberation was coming. But the Japanese knew it too. And on August 1st, 1944, Tokyo had issued a chilling order to all POW camp commanders. If there is any fear that Pozo would be retaken, due to the tide of battle turning against us. Decisive measures must be taken without returning a single POW. Decisive measures meant execution. In October 1944, the Japanese evacuated 1,600 able-bodied prisoners from Cabanatuan, shipping them to Japan. That left about 500 sick and dying men the Japanese considered too weak to transport. The prisoners knew what that meant. They'd been left behind to be killed. January 6, 1945. The guards leave. On January 6th, every Japanese guard at Cabanatuan suddenly withdrew. They just left. The camp was abandoned. At first, the prisoners thought this might be their chance to escape, but the guards had left a warning. If you attempt to leave, we will return and kill every one of you. The prisoners stayed. They were too weak to travel anyway. Most couldn't walk more than a few hundred yards without collapsing. For weeks, they waited. Every night, they expected the guards to return and murder them. And then, on January 27th, a thin man on an exhausted horse rode into American lines at Gimba. His name was Major Robert Lapham. He commanded Filipino guerrilla forces in central Luzon, and he brought urgent news. There are over 500 American POWs at Cabanatuan. The Japanese have left minimal guards, but that won't last. Based on what happened at Palawan, I believe they're planning to massacre the prisoners any day now. If we're going to save them, we need to move immediately. The commander of the U.S. 6th Army, Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, called for Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci, leader of the 6th Ranger Battalion. Kruger's order was simple. Get those men out. All of them. I don't care how you do it. Bring them home. Mucci had 48 hours to plan the most audacious rescue mission in U.S. military history. Section 2. Planning the impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci was 33 years old. He'd been a high school football coach before the war. Now he commanded the 6th Ranger Battalion, an elite unit trained for raids behind enemy lines. When General Kruger gave him the mission, Mucci's first reaction was, "This is impossible." But we're doing it anyway. Here's what made the mission impossible. The problem's distance. Cabanatuan was 30 miles behind Japanese lines. The Rangers would have to march through territory occupied by 8,000 Japanese soldiers. The camp, guarded by 150 to 200 Japanese soldiers. Guard towers, machine gun nests, barbed wire, searchlights. The prisoners, over 500 men, most too weak to walk. How do you evacuate that many sick men through 30 miles of enemy territory? The route. One main road in and out. If the Japanese blocked that road, everyone would be trapped. Timing. Intelligence suggested the Japanese might massacre the prisoners within days. Any commander looking at this mission rationally would say, it can't be done, but Mucci wasn't a rational commander. He was a man who believed that leaving 511 Americans to die was not an option. Building the team. Mucci selected 2 companies from his Ranger Battalion, C Company, commanded by Captain Robert Prince, and F Company. About 120 Rangers total, the absolute minimum needed for the assault. He also requested support from 2 specialized units, the Alamo Scouts, an elite reconnaissance unit. 6 scouts would infiltrate the area days before the raid, gathering intelligence on guard positions, prisoner locations, and Japanese troop movements. Filipino guerrillas. Major Lapham's guerrilla forces knew the terrain. They could provide guides, block Japanese reinforcements, and help evacuate the prisoners. The final force, 121 Rangers, 6 Alamo Scouts, and approximately 250 Filipino guerrilla fighters, against 8,000 Japanese soldiers in the region and 150 to 200 guards at the camp. The plan on January 28th, Mucci gathered his officers and laid out the plan. It was audacious, it was complex, and everything had to work perfectly. Phase 1. Infiltration. The Rangers would march 30 miles behind enemy lines, moving primarily at night to avoid detection. The Alamo Scouts would scout ahead, marking safe routes and warning of Japanese patrols. Phase 2. Positioning. The force would split into 3 groups. Captain Prince and C Company would assault the front gate and main compound. Lieutenant Murphy and F Company would assault the back gate. Filipino guerrillas commanded by Captain Juan Pajoda would block the main road and prevent Japanese reinforcements from reaching the camp. Phase 3, the assault. At exactly 7:45 p.m. 15 minutes before sunset, the Rangers would attack. They needed enough daylight to see what they were doing, but enough darkness to escape afterward. Phase 4, distraction. To give the Rangers those critical extra seconds to reach the camp. AP-61 Black Widow night fighter would buzz the camp, performing aerobatics and backfiring its engines. The guards would watch the sky, not the ground. Phase 5, evacuation. Filipino civilians with Carabao carts would be waiting at a prearranged point to transport prisoners who couldn't walk. The entire force would move 25 miles to the Pampanga River, where trucks would meet them and transport everyone to American lines. Timeline. The assault would take 30 minutes. The evacuation would take all night. Mucci concluded his briefing with these words: "These boys have been in that shithole beaten and starved for nearly 3 years. If they can't walk to the river, carry them. We don't leave one of them behind, not a single one. Go with God and bring our boys home." The Rangers left on the morning of January 28th, the march. For 2 days, the Rangers moved through enemy territory. They marched at night, hid during the day. They passed within a few hundred yards of Japanese positions, freezing in place when patrols came near. The Alamo Scouts were out ahead, watching everything. On January 29th, Scout Lieutenant Bill Nellis radioed bad news. Japanese convoy moving through Cabanatuan. At least 300 soldiers. They're stopping at the camp. Mucci made the hardest decision of his life. They'd have to wait another day. If they attacked while 300 additional Japanese soldiers were at the camp, the mission would fail. That night, January 29th, the Rangers hid in a Filipino village while 300 Japanese soldiers slept less than a mile away. The villagers risked their lives to hide the Americans, knowing that if they were discovered, the Japanese would massacre everyone. The next morning, January 30th, the Japanese convoy left. The scouts confirmed. Only about 150 guards remained at the camp. Mucci gave the order. Tonight. We go tonight. Section 3, 7:45 p.m. The raid at 6 p.m. on January 30th, the Rangers began their final approach to Cabanatuan POW camp. They split into assault teams. Captain Prince took C Company toward the front gate. Lieutenant Murphy took F Company toward the back gate. The Filipino guerrillas moved into blocking positions on the Cabu Bridge and the road to Cabanatuan City. And then came the hard part, crossing 800 yards of open rice paddy to reach the camp without being spotted. The Crawl Prince's men dropped to their bellies and began crawling. The rice paddies had just been harvested, leaving stubble about a foot high, barely enough cover to hide a man. For over an hour, 60 Rangers crawled forward, inches at a time. They couldn't make noise. They couldn't stand up. If the guards spotted them, machine guns in the towers would cut them to pieces. Inside the camp, the prisoners had no idea rescue was coming. Most were in their barracks, trying to stay warm. Some were too sick to move. One man, Private First Class Eugene Nielsen, later said, "I was lying on my bunk, thinking about home, thinking I'd probably never see it again." At 7:40 p.m., Prince's men reached the edge of the grass line, about 50 yards from the wire. They froze, waiting for the signal, and then they heard it, the drone of an aircraft engine, the distraction. Captain Kenneth Schreiber piloted AP-61 Black Widow, one of the few twin-engine night fighters in the Pacific. His mission was simple but insane: fly over the POW camp and make the guards think his plane was crashing. Schreiber brought his aircraft in low, just 200 feet above the camp. Then he cut power to one engine and let the plane start to drop, backfiring the engine to create loud bangs. Every Japanese guard in the camp looked up, watching the plane. Some pointed. Others raised their rifles, thinking the plane might crash into the camp. Schreiber dropped to within 100 feet of the ground, then powered back up and roared away. He circled and did it again and again. The guards were transfixed, watching the sky. They didn't notice the shadows moving through the grass toward the wire. The assault begins at exactly 7:45 p.m. Lieutenant Murphy's team opened fire. Bazooka rounds slammed into the guard towers, obliterating them in seconds. Machine gun fire raked the barracks where the Japanese guards slept. Grenades flew through windows. Within 15 seconds, every guard tower and pillbox was neutralized. One ranger ran to the front gate and shot the lock off with a .45 pistol. The gate swung open. Prince and his men poured into the camp. The Japanese guards stumbled out of their barracks, confused and disoriented. They'd been asleep seconds ago. Now they were under attack from all sides. Some tried to fight back. Rangers cut them down. Others tried to flee. More rangers were positioned to intercept them. A few guards grabbed weapons and made a stand. Bazooka teams eliminated them. The assault was overwhelming, coordinated, and brutal. Meanwhile, Prince's men ran through the POW barracks shouting, "We're Americans! We're here to rescue you! Get up! We're taking you home!" The prisoners' reaction, the Posé couldn't believe it. For 3 years, they'd prayed for rescue. Now it was actually happening. Some men wept, others cheered. Many were too weak to move. Rangers had to carry them. One prisoner, First Sergeant Charles Bassard, later described the moment. "I heard gunfire and thought, this is it. They're killing us." Then a ranger kicked open our door and yelled, "Let's go, we're Americans." I thought I was dreaming. Another prisoner, Captain Burt Bank, was too sick with malaria to walk. A ranger picked him up and carried him on his back all the way to the front gate. The rangers moved through the camp systematically, checking every barracks, every building. Mucci had said, "Not a single one left behind," and they meant it. Within 20 minutes, all 511 prisoners had been accounted for and moved to the front gate. The bridge, while the rescue was happening, Filipino guerrilla captain Juan Pajoda and his men were fighting the battle that would save everyone. About 800 Japanese soldiers, an entire battalion, were stationed at a barracks near the Kabu River Bridge, less than a mile from the POW camp. When they heard gunfire, they immediately mobilized to counterattack. Pajoda's 200 guerrillas were waiting at the bridge. The Japanese came in waves, hundreds of soldiers charging across the bridge. Pajoda's men had only light weapons, but they held their ground. They fought for over an hour, stopping multiple Japanese charges. 20 of Pajoda's men died on that bridge, but they gave the Rangers the time they needed to evacuate the prisoners. The withdrawal? By 8:15 p.m., 30 minutes after the assault began, Captain Prince fired a red flare into the sky. The signal, mission complete, time to go. The Rangers began moving the pose toward the river. Those who could walk stumbled forward, supported by Rangers. Those who couldn't walk were carried. 2 Rangers died in the assault. Private First Class Roy Sweezy, killed by friendly fire, and Corporal James Herrick, struck by a Japanese bullet. But 511 prisoners were free. The hardest part was just beginning, getting them 25 miles to American lines through enemy territory. Section 4. The march to freedom. The prisoners were in worse condition than anyone had anticipated. Most weighed less than 100 pounds. Many had dysentery so bad they couldn't control their bowels. Some were delirious with fever. Several had gangrenous wounds. One man's feet were so swollen and infected that every step left bloody footprints. The Filipino civilians who'd been recruited to help had brought 26 Carabao carts. It wasn't nearly enough. Mucci radioed for more carts. Within hours, Filipinos from surrounding villages showed up with carts, wheelbarrows, anything that could move a man. Eventually, they had over 100 carts. But the journey was agonizing. The night march. The column moved slowly, painfully slowly. Every few hundred yards, they had to stop while prisoners vomited from motion sickness or collapsed from exhaustion. Rangers carried men on their backs. They shared what little food and water they had. When one ranger asked a prisoner his name, the man wept and said, "I don't remember. I've been a number for so long, I forgot I had a name." Japanese search parties were out looking for them. Several times, the column had to freeze in place while enemy patrols passed within yards. At one point, a Japanese truck came down the road toward them. The Rangers prepared to fight, knowing that a firefight would doom the entire mission. But the truck turned off before reaching them. After marching through the night, the column reached the Pampanga River at dawn on January 31st. But they couldn't cross, yet Japanese forces controlled the opposite bank. While they waited, one of the prisoners died. His name was Private First Class Jimmy Fisher. He'd survived 3 years as a POW, survived the rescue, and made it to within 7 miles of American lines. Then his heart gave out. His last words were, "Good luck on the way out, Talavera." At 8 a.m., American forces cleared the opposite bank of the river. Trucks arrived to transport the prisoners the final distance to American lines. The men were loaded into trucks and ambulances. Many were still in shock, unable to believe they were actually free. At the American forward base in Gimba, General Kruger was waiting. When the first trucks arrived, he walked among the prisoners, looking at their conditions. He later wrote, "Most of them were in pitiable condition and could not realize they were actually safe." Medics rushed to treat the prisoners. Some needed immediate surgery. Others needed blood transfusions. All of them needed food, but they had to be fed carefully, as their shrunken stomachs couldn't handle normal portions. Over the next several days, the prisoners were transported to hospitals in Leyte, then flown to the United States. The cost of the raid was an overwhelming success. 511 American and Allied prisoners liberated, 2 Rangers killed, 21 Filipino guerrillas killed, over 500 Japanese soldiers killed. General MacArthur called it one of the most successful operations in American military history. Lieutenant Colonel Mucci and Captain Prince were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. All other officers received Silver Stars. Every Ranger and Scout received Bronze Stars. The Alamo Scouts received Presidential Unit citations. But the real heroes were the prisoners who survived 3 years of hell, the Rangers who refused to leave anyone behind, and the Filipino guerrillas and civilians who risked everything to help. Section 5. The Aftermath and Legacy. News of the Cabanatuan rescue reached the American public on February 2, 1945. It was front-page news across the country. For the first time, Americans heard the full truth about the Bataan Death March and the conditions in Japanese POW camps. The rescued prisoners gave interviews describing the torture, starvation, and brutality they'd endured, and they confirmed the worst fear. The Palawan massacre was not an isolated incident. The Japanese had planned to execute all POWs rather than allow them to be liberated. The rescue missions continue. The Cabanatuan raid triggered a series of rescue operations across the Philippines. February 3, 1945. 3,700 civilians and prisoners liberated from Santo Tomas University in Manila by the 1st Cavalry Division. February 23, 1945. 2,147 prisoners liberated from Las Barras by the 11th Airborne Division in a raid that involved paratroopers, amphibious forces, and Filipino guerrillas. February 1945. 800 prisoners liberated from Bilibid Prison by the 37th Infantry Division. In total, over 7,500 prisoners and civilians were saved in less than 1 month. All of it triggered by the 11 survivors of the Palawan massacre who told the world what was happening. What happened to the rescuers? Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci returned to the United States as a hero. He gave speeches about the raid, but always deflected credit to his men and the Filipino guerrillas. He said, "I didn't rescue those men, my Rangers did. And they couldn't have done it without Juan Pajoda and his guerrillas." Mucci lived until 1997, dying at age 86. He never stopped advocating for recognition of the Filipino forces who made the raid possible. Captain Robert Prince continued to serve in the military after the war. He rarely spoke about Cabanatuan, considering it just another mission. He died in 2009 at age 89. Captain Juan Pajoda, the Filipino guerrilla leader whose men held the bridge, was largely forgotten by history. He received no American military decoration for his actions. The Philippine government recognized him, but he never received the Distinguished Service Cross that Mucci repeatedly requested for him. Pajoda died in 1976, still bitter about being ignored by the U.S. military he'd risked his life to help. In 2025, on the 80th anniversary of the raid, American and Philippine Rangers gathered at the Cabanatuan American Memorial to honor all those who participated. Finally, the contributions of the Filipino fighters are being fully recognized. What happened to the prisoners? Of the 511 prisoners rescued, most returned to the United States and tried to rebuild their lives. But 3 years of captivity left permanent scars, physical and psychological. Many suffered from PTSD, though it wasn't called that at the time. They had nightmares about the camps. They struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why they lived when so many others died. Several prisoners weighed less than 90 pounds when rescued. Their bodies never fully recovered. Tropical diseases and malnutrition caused long-term health problems that plagued them for the rest of their lives. But they were alive, and they got to go home. One prisoner, Private Eugene Nielsen, later wrote, "That night changed my life. Before the Rangers came, I'd accepted that I was going to die. I'd made peace with it. Then suddenly, I had a future again. The Rangers gave me back my life." The lesson. The Cabanatuan raid teaches us something profound about what military forces can accomplish when they refuse to accept failure as an option. Everything about this mission said it couldn't be done. The distance, the enemy forces, the condition of the prisoners, the logistics. But Lieutenant Colonel Mucci looked at those 511 American prisoners and said, "We're bringing them home." All of them, and they did. In modern military training, the Cabanatuan raid is studied as a textbook example of joint operations, Rangers, Scouts, guerrillas working together, detailed planning and rehearsal, effective use of deception and distraction, adaptability, delaying the mission when conditions changed, leaving no one behind. The U.S. Army Rangers still teach this raid at Ranger School. It's held up as the standard for what Rangers should strive to achieve. The memorial today is a memorial at the former Cabanatuan campsite. It lists the names of the 2,656 American prisoners who died there between 1942 and 1945. It also honors the 511 who were rescued, the 2 Rangers who died in the assault, and the 21 Filipino guerrillas who gave their lives at the Cabo River Bridge. Every year, on January 30th, veterans and their families gather there to remember. The number of survivors dwindles each year. By 2025, only a handful remain alive. But the story lives on because it represents the best of what America can be, refusing to abandon our people, risking everything to save others, and honoring those who fight beside us. Looking forward, the stories I've told you over these past 5 videos: Leon Crane's 81 Days in Alaska, the Key Bird tragedy, the Grumman Duck heroes, the Palawan massacre, and now the Cabanatuan rescue, all connect to tell a larger story about World War II. It's not just about battles and strategy. It's about individuals making impossible choices. It's about heroes you've never heard of. And it's about understanding that every major historical event is actually made up of thousands of small stories. Next, I'm going to tell you about one of those small stories that had massive consequences. It's about a spy, a woman. An actress turned resistance fighter who operated in Nazi-occupied France and saved countless Allied lives. Her name was Josephine Baker, and her story is one of the most remarkable tales of courage and deception in World War II history. But that's for the next video. For now, remember the 511 ghosts of Bataan who came home because a handful of Rangers refused to leave them behind.